Top 6 beer myths busted. What is up, friends? Welcome back to the Tree House Brewing Company YouTube channel. My name is Nate, co-founder, head brewer at Tree House Brewing Company, and today we are here to smash the top 6 beer myths as we see them. Now, if you're a craft beer aficionado, you're probably going to hear these myths and be like, I know. And if you're not really, if you just happen to click on this video and you've never heard of me before, hopefully you have a good time and hopefully you'll learn something. So the first myth that I want to talk about, myth number 1, is that dark beer is always heavy. Dark beer definitely isn't always heavy. And the example that I want to use for this video is our beloved Guinness. I bet you didn't know this. Even if you're a craft beer person, even if you're a beer person, you may not know that the alcohol content of Guinness is less than the alcohol content of Bud Light. And not only that, there's no ingredients in Guinness that make it heavy or heavier or sweeter than a beer like Bud Light. So Guinness is a 4.1% beer. It uses a little bit of roasted barley, gives it a little bit of bitterness, but it doesn't give it any heaviness, and it's actually a lighter beer than Bud Light. So myth number 1 busted, dark beer does not always need to be heavy. Second myth is one that I really want to break because I think it could help improve your enjoyment of beer in general, and that myth is that beer should always be ice cold. You've seen the commercials, you've seen the sides of the can, the Rocky Mountains that turn blue and all this, and the signs that say the coldest beer in town, and that's cool for beers that are very light and don't have a lot of flavor. But as you get into craft beer, as you get into stout, as you get into Belgian style beers, more expressive styles of beers, if you're at all interested in that, you'd be leaving behind a lot of flavor and complexity if you drank them at refrigeration temp. So if you're drinking a stout, a big double IPA, generally beers that have higher alcohol content, if you let them warm up a little bit above refrigeration temp, they're going to express a lot more flavor and character, and they will be more enjoyable. So your beer should not always be kept ice cold, unless it sucks. Next myth that I want to bust is that cans are inferior to bottles. I feel like this is somewhat of an outdated myth to bust. 5-10 years ago, even 20 years ago, the craft beer industry, even the beer industry in general, worked to let you know that cans are a more protective vessel for your beer. They do have a liner in there that protect them from any types of metallic flavors that might leach into the beer. In fact, most can manufacturers have a minimum pH that they'll allow into their cans so that leaching does not occur, and they will not sign a contract with you unless you can guarantee that you're not going to put something super acidic into a can to make it worse. So the idea that cans are inferior to bottles is not true at all, and in fact, they're superior in just about every way. They protect the beer from getting light struck, they protect it from oxygenation, and they travel really well, and you can throw them in your backpack and drink them on the train or anywhere else that your heart desires. So yes, cans are not inferior to bottles. Myth number 4 is that fresher beer is always better. This can be true some of the time, but it's not true most of the time. One thing that I will say is that 95% of beer styles do want to be refrigerated, especially pale lager, hoppy beer, even stout most of the time. The types of beers that don't want to be refrigerated that can improve with time are bottle or can conditioned Belgian style beer, mixed fermentation beer, etc. Those generally want to be kept cool and at cellar temperature. But again, the idea that fresher is better is generally not true. The way that I think about this is, if we use hoppy beer as an example, when it's fresh, it's about here. And it gets better, it gets better, it gets better, it gets better, until it reaches its maximum deliciousness, which can be 3 to 12 weeks from packaging, provided that it's kept cold and packaged at low oxygen. And then from there, the beer starts to get worse. So if you are a new beer consumer and you say, I'm gonna find the freshest beer for the cookout and it's gonna be the very best beer, sometimes when you get beer that's too fresh, it's not actually at its peak. So fresher is most definitely not always better unless the beer isn't very good. Myth number 5 is, do more hops mean more bitterness? And the answer is sometimes. Generally not really. In modern hoppy beer making, the more hops you use generally, toward the end of the brewing process will result in a beer that's very bright and flavorful, but doesn't have a ton of bitterness. Back in the early days of craft beer, back in the days of beer in general, there was a lot of marketing that happened that said that this beer is too bitter, you shouldn't ever drink beer that has any sort of bitterness. And then there was a craft beer rebellion against that, and craft brewers were like, we're gonna add as many hops as possible to the beer and make it as bitter as possible. And we're going to market that to you. We're going to say our beer has 80 IBUs, 100 IBUs. I think there was a Mikkeller beer that said it was 1,000 IBUs. And there was kind of this bitterness war that took place. And it created this perception that the more hops you use, the more bitterness you get. And for a period of time, that was true. But in 2025, a lot of hops sometimes are used on the cold side of brewing. They're used after the hot side of brewing. And the type of flavor that it imparts upon the beer does not include bitterness. More hops can mean more bitterness, but more often than not in 2025, it does not mean that at all. All right, the final myth might be the most controversial. And if you're watching this video, subscribing to the channel is a huge help, as is leaving your thoughts and comments down below. Hopefully, this last one can instigate a few comments because there's a lot of varying opinions on this, and I hold a really strong one. Myth number 6 is that beer foam is bad. Beer foam can be bad if it's mismarketed. So in other words, if you're paying for 16 ounces of beer and you get 12 ounces of beer with 1 ounce of foam in a 16-ounce glass, I can understand why you'd be upset. But if you get 16 ounces of product that includes a little 2-inch head of foam on your beer, the reality is 2 things. One, that pour is releasing some of the gas in the beer, making its drinkability and smoothness a little bit better than it would have been if they poured the beer without a head. And then the second thing is that it opens up the beer's expressiveness and character. So if you're drinking anything other than a pale lager, whether the beer is a stout, an IPA, Belgian-style beer, that head is going to contain more concentrated aroma compounds that are going to make your enjoyment and the priming of your palate for that beer greater than if it did not have a head. So if you're really hung up on the price of your beer and the volume that you're getting, certainly at times foam can be seen as a bad thing, but 99.9% of the time, a proper beer pour, regardless of style, needs a tiny, tiny little bit of foam. All right, gang, so that's it. Quick and easy, top 6 beer myths, I think busted. I'm an amenable guy, so if you have other thoughts, leave your thoughts down below. If there's anything that we didn't mention that you'd want to see in future content discussed about beer and whether or not we think that it's valid, just let us know. Leave your thoughts. I want to thank you for watching. Your support of the channel is awesome. Have a great night.